Good morning, afternoon, or evening, y'all. My name is Shannon, and today we are going to be talking about 25 books slash series that I hope to be getting to sometime this year. We're going to be starting first with the books that have not been released. These are going to be different from my most anticipated releases of 2025 because I did not know about these books when I filmed that video. The first one, this is absolutely the book that I am most excited to be released this year, and it is The Bonds of Hercules by Jasmine Moss. I will insert a picture of the cover somewhere. This is a continuation of the series Blood of Hercules. I bought this book right after Christmas. I read it on the 11th of January, read it in a day, absolutely became obsessed. And then I read a book in between and I decided to read it again because I wanted to read it again in 1 week. That is how obsessed I am about this book. I cannot even begin to explain the thrall that this book currently has me in. This book is about Alexis, and Alexis has grown up in an incredibly rough neighborhood in Montana. There's basically like an apocalyptic type world where gods are real and they come and like help fight titans that will basically kill anything. And she's grown up really rough, and she's taking this exam. She has to prick her blood for the exam, and she ends up finding out that she's a Spartan, and she ends up being magicked away to Italy where some things happen, and she gets these two gods as her mentors, Patro and Achilles, and they are her mentors for the Crucible, which is an intense, like, academy school type thing where you're there for 2 straight weeks. You cannot sleep, you cannot eat, and you barely get any water. And it's just like an endless cycle of learning. And while all of that is going on, there are 2 of her professors, Augustus and Charon, I think it's pronounced, but I could be completely wrong. It's Kharon, and they're really intrigued in Alexis, and Patro and Achilles are really intrigued in Alexis. And usually polygamy or anything like that in books kind of weirds me out. Maybe it's just that it's been so incredibly normalized in like gods and goddesses and their myths, but it didn't weird me out. I was actually kind of obsessed with it in this book, to be honest. But it was so good, and that book ends on a complete cliffhanger, and I'm so excited to see where the series goes. That doesn't come out until October, which absolutely sucks. But next we have Rebel Witch by, I think it's Kristen Ciccarelli. I could be completely wrong in that. This is the final book in the Crimson Moth duology. First book was Heartless Hunter. I read that at the end of the year last year, rated it 5 stars, became absolutely obsessed. This book is about Rune, and Rune is secretly a witch in a world that has recently had a major revolution that turned against the witches. Anyone who is found to be a witch will be killed. One of the main leaders of this revolution was Gideon, and he has a whole tragic backstory with that, but there is a very specific reason why he hates witches as much as he does. And in his current state, there is a specific witch that is driving him absolutely crazy because she is breaking out other witches from his prisons, and she is known as the Crimson Moth. Surprise, surprise, it's Rune. And something happens where she is kind of under suspicion for being a witch, and Gideon decides to get close to her to figure out if it's her, if it's someone in her circle. Meanwhile, she is cozying up to Gideon to hopefully learn information about where they are keeping a very specific witch so that they can break her out. It is so incredible. Meanwhile, all of this is happening, Gideon's younger brother Alex, absolutely obsessed and in love with Rune, has been his entire life. It is insane. I adored that book. I rated it 5 stars. I'm so excited for the final book in that duology to come out, and it comes out in February, so I won't have to be waiting long at all for that. And then we have something I'm so excited for, the Throne of Glass series. I'm absolutely going to start reading this year. I don't know how far I will get into it. I am hoping I will finish it, but I tend to space out series. Otherwise, I get way too enthralled, and I get really big book slumps after them, typically. That's what happened when I read ACOTAR for the first time. I have learned since then. I actually just got this book on loan on the Libby app for Kindle because that's just how I prefer to read books right now, and it's so much easier to add the annotations in after the fact than while I'm reading. It takes so much more time. I am so excited to start this series. Along with that, we have the Crescent City series. I really would like to read this series. I've heard so many things. I know that the second book in this series is a particular anomaly within the Sarah J Maas universe, I should say. I'm so much more into fantasy than I was previously, and I'm just very excited to get back into the whole Sarah J Maas universe. Next, we have a book I actually don't physically own the copy of. It is The Game the Gods Play. I will insert a picture of the cover somewhere on the screen. Oh my god, that's honestly kind of hilarious. Didn't know this until this very moment. The name of this series is The Crucible. If you remember what I was literally just talking about with The Blood of Hercules, Alexis participates in The Crucible. Anyhow, so in this book, we have a Hades and Persephone retelling. I will always eat up a Hades and Persephone retelling. I actually have a necklace that has a pendant that has Persephone on it. I love Persephone, I always have. But this, it seems like, is a universe where gods are very much present. And it seems like this girl has been consistently trying to avoid Zeus her entire life. And then one night she actually encounters Hades. And he ends up entering the Crucible this year, which determines who will hold like the seat as the ruler of Olympus. And in this Crucible, the gods name a mortal person to be like their victor and fight in the games on their behalf, basically. And Hades picks her. It sounds so good. It sounds so incredibly excellent, especially just after getting off of The Blood of Hercules. This sounds so good to me, and I'm so excited to read it. The next book we have is a book that might surprise you, might not, I don't know. It is the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. So this book is about Rin, and she is an orphan, and she ends up being tested for like specific abilities, powers, I'm not quite sure, but she ends up surpassing anything really that's ever been seen. And she ends up going to this military school. There are rivalries and people are targeting her. It sounds so good. And it says she has a very strong power for the art of shamanism, and it sounds so incredibly good. I've heard remarkable things about this series in the past. It's just a fantasy series I would really like to get into. If you couldn't tell, obviously, but all the books I've already spoken about, I am very much in my fantasy era. I've really taken a step back from contemporary romance, and fantasy is hitting so hard for me right now. So I'm absolutely gonna capitalize on it, and you will see that 95% of these books are fantasy. There are only 3 romance books I will be showing you guys. So yeah, let's just keep going. The next book we have shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. A Court of Silver Flames. I started reading this about 1.5 years ago now. I was in the process of falling into a book slump. I didn't know it at the time, but that's definitely what was happening. And I got like 30% of the way through before I just put it down and never picked it back up. I actually have my hard copy up there, and that is what has those annotations in it for when I first started reading the hardcover, but I'd really like to give it a chance again. I know there are so many Nesta girlies out there. I am not one of them. It may be just because I haven't read the book, but as of right now, I am a Nesta hater. I honestly will never feel badly about saying that, because yes, she went through a lot. Yes, her parents were horrible to her, but she was so horrible to her sisters. She was cruel and mean. She could have done so many other things, but those, I'm not gonna get into it. I'm not gonna get into it. I could talk about this for so long. I am a Nesta hater as of right now, and I would really like to read this and see if that opinion changes. The next book we have Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I read Divine Rivals, I think in 2023, and I loved it. Oh boy, did I love it. And when I really and truly love a book, rate it 5 stars, and it is the first book in a series, I tend to get very scared to read any of the next books. I just get very intimidated, and the longer I put it off, the harder it is for me to get back into the series, which is kind of why I haven't picked this back up. I'm so intrigued to see where this story went after the previous book. For those of you who aren't aware, Divine Rivals is an incredibly beautiful story where there is currently a war going on between gods, and it is like early 1900s, I think, and Iris and Roman are kind of rivals at this newspaper they work at, and meanwhile they are writing each other letters and they don't know it's them. And it's just the most beautiful love story. I absolutely adore the way that Rebecca Ross writes. I also loved A River Enchanted, which is another book she's written, and I'm just so excited to see where this series goes. Next, we have When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. This book is about Rave, and she is a very good assassin. She ends up crossing paths with a bounty hunter, and I think she gets kidnapped by the Guild of Nobles. And then there is Khan, who kind of just happens upon her in what he's going through, and it seems like a romantasy. It seems so good. I've heard such marvelous things about this book from everyone I've talked about it to. It is a monster of a book, but I'm so excited to get to it. The next book we have is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. I'm not going to lie, I honestly do not understand what the back of this book says it's about, but I do know, but it is basically two people kind of hunting each other, and I know it's a romantasy, and it just, I'll eat it up every single time. I know I will. Fantasy really just has my whole heart right now, and I've heard marvelous things about this book. I don't know why I keep saying that. I've heard marvelous things about all of these books, but yeah, I'm very excited to read it. Next, we have the One Dark Window books. This book, again, don't really understand what it's about. I know this book is about Elspeth, and it seems like she has a very powerful kind of darkness within her, and she ends up running into this person that ends up being the nephew of the king, and he's also guilty of high treason, so there's that. But I always eat up stories about any incredibly powerful female character, and I know for 100% certain that is what most of these books are, and I will always love it. I love these kinds of books, and I've heard so many incredible things about this series. It really popped off on TikTok last year, I know that for sure, but now that I'm in my fantasy era, I'm very excited to read this book. Next, we have The Courting of Bristol Keats by Mary E. Pearson. This book is about Bristol, and both of her parents have like vanished, and she ends up finding out that they might not actually be dead. They might be on the run from someone. So she goes into this, I believe, like Fae realm to try to find them. She ends up teaming up with someone to help find them, but he may just be the person they're actually running from. It sounds so good. I always love books about the Fae, and I'm sure this will be no different. Next, we have Five Broken Blades by Mai Corland. This story is about 5 separate people, I feel like that's kind of implied, who come together to kill a god king. And it kind of reminds me just a wee bit of Six of Crows, just with the whole banding together, not really trusting everyone. It sounds really good. and I'm sure there is an element of romance in this. I just absolutely love like mission type fantasy books like these, and I'm very excited to see where this will go. I know that the second book in the series was actually like just released. It seems really good, not knowing who you can trust. Everyone has like this goal, but they don't really know each other. It even says on the back of the book, let the best liar win. So you already know there's going to be some kind of deception in here. Next, we have Heavenbreaker by Sarah Wolf. Again, this got major attention when it was first released, particularly because of the painted edges. This book is about a girl who is essentially the bastard daughter of, I believe, a duke, and she comes back with a vengeance to kill everyone in this particular house because of what they tried to do to her, what they did to her mother. But I know that there's someone within the house who she forms an attachment to. Romantasy, you know the vibes. I'm so excited to read this. I mean, they all sound so good, and I am kind of obsessed with ruthless female characters. I won't even lie, I just read the description and I still don't understand entirely what it's about, but I've heard marvelous things about this particular fantasy book, especially in the romantasy parts, and I am very excited to see what it will hold. The next book I'm going to dabble in is The Zodiac Academy. I've known about the series for forever, but I feel like recently it's really started to get some more attention again, and I've heard very mixed things about this series. I've heard people who loved it, people who couldn't stand it after the first couple books. I'm very intrigued to see where I will fall on that spectrum. I, again, not super sure what it's about. I know that there's an academy. I know it's like fae and elemental magic and all these kinds of things. There are bullies that definitely turn into a romance, and that's pretty much all I know about it. And I wish I could tell you guys more about that, but I do also really enjoy going into my books mostly blind because it makes it a more enjoyable, surprising read. The next book we have Lightlark by Alex Astor. I bought this book back when it first came out, which is why I have this beautiful hardcover version of it. I honestly can't believe this is the naked hardback. I think it's absolutely exquisite. This book is about a fighting competition, kind of Hunger Gamesy if you want to go there, where the rulers of 6 realms collect on this one island every 100 years or so to fight for like power. I think the winner gets the power or some kind of thing like that. And this book has had so much said about it. I remember before it even came out, I was excited for this to be released. I thought it sounded so incredibly amazing. Then like maybe a couple weeks before it was even released, people started giving it 1-star reviews, like absolutely tanked its Goodreads score, and they hadn't even read it. I honestly have no idea why that happened, where the controversy for this book came from, but I mean, I'd like to know, I'd like to see if I like it, you know? And I know there's romance in here. I believe it's classified as YA. It just all sounds so good to me. So I'm absolutely gonna try to read it this year. The next book we have is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. I do want to get into Cassandra Clare's other books, but I feel like this would be a more beginner approach, maybe. This book is about Kel and Lynn, and Kel was previously an orphan, I'm pretty sure, and he was pulled out of his life in order to become the Swordcatcher, which is a body double for the prince, which honestly is a really smart idea if I think on it, but he basically knows he's going to die in his job because like there's a reason he has a body double, like people want him dead. And Lynn is a magical like healer, I believe, and they're technically supposed to stay behind this one area, but she ventures out in order to heal people, and their paths end up crossing. It just sounds like such an incredible book, and I'm very excited to get into the Cassandra Clare universe world, and this is just like a fun thing I feel like I should share with you guys. I remember when this book was released, there were so many misprints like within the books. I do have a misprint in my book. The map is upside down in the front of the book, so there's that. I thought I wanted to share it with you guys. I always think that's interesting. The next book we have is Jade City by Fonda Lee. This book is absolutely what someone would call, I think, high fantasy or epic fantasy, where the fantasy elements of the story really take it up a notch. It's not just like fantasy elements. This is a whole ass fantasy book. I'm just gonna read the back of the book to you guys because I quite literally don't really understand what it's about. For centuries, honorable green-bone warriors have used magical jade to enhance their abilities and defend the island of Kakan from foreign invasion. Now the war is over and a new generation vies for control of Kakan's bustling capital city. 4 siblings of the powerful Call family must prepare for battle, and the fragile peace between the clans is about to break. It sounds very high fantasy. Honestly, for this video, I was debating between this book or A Priory of the Orange Tree. And Priory of the Orange Tree is probably one of the most intimidating books I have on my shelves. So I decided to go for Jade City. I may end up regretting that decision, but I would really like to give it a shot. The next book we have is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I've obviously heard wonderful things about this series. I am just very excited to see where this series will go. I've heard it described as cozy fantasy, which I didn't really think that I was into until I read, I'm honestly not sure, but I know that last year I read a cozy fantasy book that I really enjoyed, and I was like, if this is what cozy fantasy is, I would probably eat up Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. The book is quite literally what the title says it is. She's trying to create an encyclopedia of fairies. I know there's also a romance element within this series, and I'm very excited to see where that's gonna go in terms of a cozy fantasy book. But yeah, I also just like adore the naked hardcovers for these books, and the 3rd book in the series comes out in February. So the last fantasy book we have to discuss, then we have our 3 romance books, is The Final Strife by Sarah L. Arifi. This book is something I've picked up and put down so many times, but now that I'm finally in my fantasy era, I feel like it is the perfect time to try to pick it back up again. This book is about Scylla and Anor, and they have grown up in vastly different environments. I believe Scylla is an orphan, and Anor has grown up under the most powerful ruler in the empire, and they both hate the way that the empire is running. And oh wait, actually this isn't the last fantasy book, we have one more after this. But this world is also ruled, like they have classes based on what color your blood is. So red is the blood of elites, blue is the blood of the poor, and clear is the blood of slaves. So it just seems so intriguing, and I know I've heard of other books that have that kind of premise. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean it won't be incredible. It sounds incredible to me. Okay, the last fantasy book we have to discuss is A Shadow Crown by Melissa Blair, I think. This is the 2nd book in the Halfling saga. I read the 1st book this month. I ate it up, absolutely loved it. I'm so intrigued to see where it's going to go from the end of the last book. The 1st book is about Kira, and she is an assassin for the king, not really by choice. She is a halfling, which means she's half elf and half human, and any halflings in this empire are slaves to the king. If they are found and they are not working for the king, they are killed. And Kira does a lot of that killing, and the only reason she does it really is because in the broader scheme of things, she is working so hard to make sure that halflings are safe. She only kills the people that she is ordered by the king to do, and she only does that because she knows if she doesn't, she'll be killed. While that's going on, someone named the Shadow is really screwing things up for the king, and Kira is tasked with finding him and killing him. And that search brings her to the Fae realm, and things get so good and so interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely like to continue the series this year. Okay, now for the romance books. The first one we have is Ricochet by Krista and Becca Ritchie. I read the first book in the Addicted series last year, absolutely loved it. Kind of gave me Magnolia Parks vibes in terms of the way it made me feel. I would really enjoy to continue this series, and the first book, at least, is about Lily and Lo, and they are both in horrible places in their lives. They pretend to be together in order to enable each other's addictions. Lo is an incredibly horrid alcoholic, and Lily is addicted to sex. And they end up kind of falling in love, actually, and it's horrible and beautiful and tragic. And it was such a good book, and I really want to continue the series. The next book I would like to read is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I have been thinking about this book a lot lately, and I think it sounds so good. This book is about Emma and Justin, and they both kind of feel like they're cursed at love because each time they date someone and break up, the person they were dating goes on to like marry the next person they date. So they figure if they date each other, the next person they will date will be the person they marry. Little weird. However, while that's going on, we also have incredibly deep things happening where Emma's toxic mother shows up and Justin assumes guardianship of 3 of his siblings, and it sounds like so good and honestly like a very deep romance that I would actually really enjoy. I don't think I'm gonna get to it till the summer though. So the last book of this video, Taming 7 by Chloe Walsh. I so badly would like to get to this year. That does mean, however, that I also need to finish Saving 6 and read Redeeming 6. I don't think that would be too hard to do, in all honesty, but it's just like getting myself to do it. This book is the 5th book in the Boys of Tommen series. I have loved every book I read in that series thus far. I've loved where I've gotten to in Saving 6 thus far, and I'm sure this will be no different. From what I've heard, this book actually has the lowest ratings of the books in the series, which I'm intrigued to see why. But this is Claire and Gibbsy's books. Within the previous books, Claire is Shannon's best friend and Gibbsy is Johnny's best friend, and they both have really tragic pasts that are kind of like hinted at in some of the previous books, but we definitely don't get any kind of in-depth what happened. I'm just very excited to see their romance and all that it holds, and it just sounds like it'll be such a fun read. But with that, those are 25 of the books I'm hoping to get to in 2025. I sincerely hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys got this far into the video, I cannot thank you enough. I appreciate every single one of your beautiful faces. I hope you all are having an absolutely extraordinary morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!